Hey folks, welcome back to this director's cut audio video version of Purpose Work Nation. So great to be with you all. Honored that you're here with me. Today is actually my birthday. September 6th, 1976 is when uh, my mom brought me into this world, although I resisted it. Apparently, I had my umbilical cord wrapped around my neck. I wasn't eager to be here, but I'm here 46 years later. Uh, So, as I mentioned, we are now diving into chapter three today, which is called Culture is a Matter of Life and Death. In chapter one, we looked at business as the front line for national renewal. We explored its very mixed legacy, one of villainy, of being a savior, being a religion itself. And that really just kind of painted the picture of like, this thing is there's you can't you can't simplify it. It's done a lot of good things, and it obviously is responsible for a lot of the bad things. Uh, and it's completely redeemable. Uh, in the second chapter, we looked at the ethics of the bison and contrasted that with those of the eagle as a more accurate expression of our nation's powerful purpose. So, all created equal, e pluribus unum, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and to form a more perfect union. Basically, fight like hell to make sure that these things continue and expand. Um, so, as I mentioned, the first three chapters are more philosophical and historical. In this chapter, we're going to really look at what culture is and why it matters. It's not just a nice to have. So we're going to go into depth on that. But as I've been doing over the last couple chapters, beginning to presence, really the change that we're seeking to create in really all of our social contexts, whether that's professional, family, and that's to bring our full person online. So we'll do the pies check in physical, intellectual, emotional, spiritual, and I invite you to do it with me. So after I'm complete, go ahead and pause and check in with yourself, or better yet, someone else. So physically, um, feeling pretty good. Did some yoga today with my mom. She's in town visiting. Uh, and on Friday, went to a water park in Tijuana and went down this giant slide called the Slip and Fly, like 45-degree pitch, and then you J up and you land. You go shooting into the air and then land in 15 feet of water. First time I did it, I back flopped. So my back is very tired. We also went on some other slides and got thrown around, banged around, so my body's just covered in bruises. Shoulders are sore for some reason. Intellectually, uh, yeah, very stimulated. As I've shared before, I'm working my way through the documentary history of the United States and read this morning uh, the Populist Party platform from 1892, which could read like it's today. Because it's like both political parties are indifferent and ineffective, and we're being bent over a barrel by wealthy and corporate interests. So I was inspired and also kind of heartbroken that we're kind of in a similar spot today. Emotionally, very grateful. My mom and my wife and I have had a lot of powerful and some hard conversations since she got into town. But yeah, just grateful for my wife, grateful for my mom. Um, they're all they're both great leaders, do a lot of personal work, so we go pretty deep pretty quick, which is beautiful. Um, and we also do some pretty silly stuff too. We played Cards Against Humanity uh, on Sunday with my stepdad, who has passed away. So put a T-shirt, one of his T-shirts on a chair and a ball cap, and played Cards Against Humanity and played for him, and he almost won. So checking in with gratitude there and also joy. that we found a way to still have fun with him, even though he's not with us in body anymore. Yeah, also just grateful my wife got me tickets to the Bruce Springsteen concert, which, is, you know, pretty American. And my mom and my wife know that my patriotism is unique or nuanced, and Bruce helps me connect in a powerful way. So it's a very thoughtful gift. So feeling very honored and grateful. Spiritually, I because I'm not able to do my morning ritual in my altar because my wife and I are actually sleeping in this office when my mom's in town. I actually went out to her office and meditated and prayed in front of her altar today, and that was a very unique experience. Just looking at the objects that she has there. Hopefully that's okay. I haven't told her yet. Hopefully my prayers didn't mess up her prayers. Um, but yeah, it was a kind of spiritually novel experience to be in her sacred space. So I'm in. So again, I invite you to pause and to check in with yourself and with someone else. Okay, let's dive in. Chapter 3, Culture is a Matter of Life and Death. Maybe that works for y'all out in California, but we're sitting on a powder keg right now. I was talking with a friend of mine who's the head of DEI of a 300,000 plus person global technology company. How do you mean? I inquired. We've got All Lives Matter MAGA folks here. Good people who do a great job, but who create this constant hostility and resistance to anything DEI. We can't put them in a training with people of color. It'll re-traumatize folks. They'll leave, I'll miss my DEI targets, and then I'll have to leave. I'm already seeing disproportionately high early retirements and leaves of absence for women and people of color. If we start a big culture change effort, I think it will only get worse. And she was right. It was July of 2020, just weeks after George Floyd's murder, and the media's divide and conquer approach had reached a fever pitch, pitting conservatives against liberals, cities against suburbs, all lives matter against Black Lives Matter. She knew she had to do something beyond providing mental health resources and public statements that even a public statement was going to kick the hornet's nest. As we've explored, this dynamic exists because traditional DEI approaches, such as unconscious bias training, anti-discrimination trainings, anonymous reporting systems, employee resource groups or ERGs, and hiring quotas frequently have a shaming and corrective and paternalistic feel. It's no surprise that many white folks consciously resist or tune out and subconsciously deepen the sense of feeling attacked and the need to protect their identity and way of life. As we previously learned, the result is that the DEI industry as a whole has failed to deliver positive outcomes in hiring, retention, and promotion of diverse candidates over the last 2 decades. Given this history, introducing new or expanded DEI efforts at any time is a giant risk. And in the wake of multiple videos documenting the murders of BIPOC folks by police, a summer of protests, and one of the most consequential elections in U.S. history, that risk just expanded 10 times. It also seems that our attitude towards racial justice is rooted in our partisan identity. For example, 85% of folks who lean left support Black Lives Matter, and 78% of those who lean right oppose it. Similarly, 91% of Democrats say black people face a lot of discrimination in our society versus the 42% of Republicans who say that. This suggests that the topics of diversity, race, equity, and inclusion are likely to ignite these deeper racial and partisan identities and further aggravate this situation. So my friend was right. DEI is risky business. Now, while some white folks opened their hearts and began the journey to allyship in 2020, some dug their heels in deeper. What's abundantly clear is that we cannot keep doing the same things and expect different results. Death to the tyrants. Unfortunately, our political and racial tribalism isn't merely one of catty clicks and scornful frowns. Many believe that the other side should actually suffer and die. 54% of us believe our fellow citizens are the biggest threat to our country. And 33% of us now justify the use of violence for political gains, with 15% of Democrats and 20% of Republicans believing it would be a good thing if a bunch of folks on the other side just died. If folks are in the 33% of us who support violence and they feel culture, race, or politics play a role in them being passed over for promotion or in their dismissal, then it could get very bad very quickly. Of course, this wouldn't be such an issue if AR-15s, there's I think like 10 million now assault rifles, and ammonium nitrate were not so easily accessible. Obviously, we're talking about much more than a business risk. It's more than people not getting along, not trusting each other, or not wanting to collaborate with or promote diverse colleagues. This is a deep tear in the moral fabric of society, and it impacts our bodies, our minds, our souls, and democratic institutions. Now, I'm not crying wolf here. The threat is as real as the chair you're sitting in. I know this from personal experience. In the summer of 2020, my wife and I painted our windows, put up a Black Lives Matter sign in our yard to show our support for the BIPOC folks in our community. After a few weeks, our sign was defaced, so we fixed it. Shortly thereafter, a neighbor alerted me that our house had been targeted. Someone who lived a couple miles away had taken a photo of our home and posted it along with our address on the Instagram feed, Dark Knight SD, or for San Diego. This person was holding public discussions about bringing death to the tyrants, meaning Black Lives Matter supporters, and forming a militia to take us out, along with the other homes in our area voicing support for Black Lives Matter. Let me repeat, he wanted to take us out. I reported it to the San Diego Police Department along with proof of Dark Knight SD's link to the personal account of this person. After I told the dispatcher what had happened and described the evidence I had on my phone, she said, "So what did these Black Lives Matter people do to you again?" I was shocked. Had she not heard anything I said? How could she think this person's white supremacist actions had anything to do with Black Lives Matter supporters? 3 hours later, 2 units showed up and I told them what happened. I offered to show them the evidence on my phone and they declined to look at it. Instead, they told me to take the signs down. Let me just pause here. They told me to cower. They told me to forego my First Amendment right to free speech. They told me not to voice my support for people of color. The police told me this. They told me that there is violence and intimidation on both sides of the issue. Both sides of what, I wondered. Then it clicked for me why the dispatcher thought it was BLM supporters who were suspected. It was clear that the San Diego Police Department viewed Black Lives Matter negatively, and that it was likely that their news sources were the same ones painting Black Lives Matter as a domestic terror organization, which is literally the opposite of what Black Lives Matter is. This is an organization that mobilizes support for stopping the terror rendered upon communities of color by police and white nationalists. A friend advised me to report the incident to the FBI, which I did, and heard nothing. Another friend at the Department of Justice talked to her colleague who tracked domestic terrorism incidents. Her colleague did this covertly, of course, as the Trump administration officially ignored it and allocated no resources to stopping it. I learned that politically and racially motivated domestic terror incidents were popping up all over the country. Folks in Roseville, California were spraying blue dots on the curbs of Biden supporters. There were lynchings in Palmdale, California. And in Connecticut, they hung nooses from a construction site. She also told me that nothing was going to happen about it unless there was a change in the DOJ's policy on domestic terrorism. And as the surveys reveal, many of us likely have family and friends inclined towards the use of violence, even if they've never said anything to it about or anything to us about it. We're also clear that this is the beginning of something far worse. 51% of us expect an increase in violence. Saw another study recently. I think it was something like 70% of both Democrats and Republicans are somewhat supportive of breaking up the union. Like, yeesh. 71% of us believe democracy itself is in jeopardy, and 93% of us recognize that our hatred for one another is a problem. The problem is pervasive and a change is needed. Given the January 6th denialism, defensiveness, and obstructionism, the deep divisions in Congress, and the recent perversions of electoral integrity across the majority of states, we are in what Robert Kagan of the Brookings Institute calls a constitutional crisis, with violence likely in 2024, if not sooner. Put another way, we are in what Boston University professor and former Reagan administration State Department official Angelo Codevilla termed a cold civil war. Despite no evidence of election fraud, 82% of Fox viewers and 97% of OAN viewers believe President Biden was not justly elected, with one person publicly asking at an event, I think in Idaho or Montana, when do we get to use the guns? We need only recall the 1994 Rwandan genocide to see how quickly things can escalate from cold to hot, from disinformation and hate speech to genocide and war. There were months and months of vitriol on the radio, while tens of thousands of machetes were quietly distributed. Then the long-waited for cue, kill the cockroaches, came over the radio. Within the next 100 days, between 500,000 and 1.1 million Rwandans were dead. Of course, it can be argued that the conditions in Rwanda aren't exactly the same in our nation today, but they aren't that different either. It wasn't that long ago that our nation tore itself apart over differing views on who deserves life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. 750,000 of us died in the Civil War. That represented 2.5% of the population. If we lost 2.5% of our nation today, that would be 7 million deaths. And it wasn't that long ago that Germany tore the world in two for strikingly similar reasons. Was January 6th a dry run for a civil war, like Hitler's 1923 failed coup? It's hard to say. But with easily available ammonium nitrate, 46% of us owning almost 400 million guns, and 33% of us in support of political violence, the stakes and risks have never been higher. It goes without saying that our lives, careers, and communities depend on peace and a working democracy. Further, this hate and risk of violence doesn't operate outside of our economy. It's not a hobby or a side hustle. It's deeply enmeshed in our culture at large, including our economy. It's in the hearts of our investors, employees, customers, and with over 10 million U.S. citizens sympathizing with the insurrection and white nationalism, we now have 838 registered white supremacist hate groups in the United States, which is near its all-time high. And like, people think that this is only the South or Idaho or Michigan, but it's everywhere. We've got 30 of them here in San Diego County. So this is a big problem. A big problem. But you might never know if your neighbors, customers, employees, and investors are white nationalists. As 63% of us are afraid to share our political views, and almost a third of us self-censor our political beliefs for fear of losing our jobs. These are the people representing your brand, holding your shares, servicing your customers, and trying to collaborate together on teams, and also buying your products. Like, as you might imagine, these attitudes fuel further divisive rhetoric and have significant economic consequences. According to a faculty report from Harvard Business School, political dysfunction is the #1 barrier to strengthening our nation's economic competitiveness. So let's pause there for a second. We're behind the eight ball with so many critical infrastructure challenges right now, from climate change to high-speed internet to safe bridges, tunnels, roads, canals, all the things that our economy depends on. And we can't make those investments, at least not substantially. I know Biden was able to get through some of the Build Back Better because of this divisiveness. So if we don't fix this divisiveness, which is, again, in our organizations, with our customers, investors, we as a nation will not have a competitive economy, because everyone's kicking our butts, whether it's education, renewable energy, sustainable transit, healthy food, effective schools, effective healthcare. I mean, everyone's kicking our tail right now because we are so divided. In the wake of these deep divisions and increasingly violent tribalism, it's clear that our approaches to culture, including DEI, must be completely re-envisioned. We must build connections and cultivate shared purpose, lower the temperature, and elevate our common humanity. Like everything else pre-pandemic and pre-George Floyd's murder and pre-January 6th, we must bring greater care and intention to how we shape culture. When even the words diversity, equity, and inclusion raise hairs on the backs of many white necks, we must address inequity and racism with more than a traditional DEI approach. We can't keep punching white folks on the nose with it. It doesn't work. It likely never did. We have to treat the problem holistically and systematically. To do so, we must root out the eagle in all its forms and cultivate the bison. How we can heal. Our last chance against this deluge of danger, despair, disarray, dehumanization, and democratic collapse is the organization. Work is now how many people get the majority of their needs met. Income, healthcare, meaning, connection, growth, achievement. It's the plow, the alehouse, church, school, and hospital rolled up into one. While I think most of us would want it to be otherwise, having a fulfilling career with affordable quality healthcare that's disentangled from work, and a shorter, flexible work week with time for friends, family, the outdoors, religion, and civic engagement, work is the centerpiece of our nation's culture and identity. As such, work is the root of all that is good and bad about our nation, which is also to say that organizational leaders are responsible for what continues to be good and bad about it. And with the clarity about what we know to be missing, purpose, belonging, connection, and common cause, we have an incredible opportunity to take responsibility for leading our nation into the Bison era and establishing a meaningful legacy. As leaders, in times of peace, we have to be grounded in our purpose and values and look at the data dispassionately, assess the risks and opportunities, and invest our time and our resources wisely. However, in times of crisis, we must not only take wise and purposeful action to heal, but also substantial, systemic, and sustained action to prevent further harm. This is a time of multiple crises. We are unwell, impoverished, sad, angry, disempowered, and heavily armed. As my friend Renee Smith, the CEO of A Human Workplace, observed, this is our Apollo 13 moment. She was referencing a scene from the movie Apollo 13 when Mission Control realized that the astronauts would not survive unless they rebuilt the ship's CO2 filter mid-flight. And this is what needs to be done now. We must realize that our flight plans from 2019 and even those from 2020, 2021, and 2022 are useless. We have to turn all our cards face up and start playing a new game. We must soberly embrace the current reality. Organizations are currently a nesting ground for hate, divisiveness, bullshit roles and responsibilities, burnout and mental health epidemics, and business models that are responsible for the vast majority of greenhouse gases. Our supply chains are vulnerable, our democratic institutions are crumbling, our employees want living wages, purpose, and belonging, extreme weather is decimating our communities, and customers want purpose-driven carbon-neutral products. It's time to rethink everything with the Bison ethos in mind and in heart. It's time to place all of our tools, our purpose, our values, and our people functions on the table to rebuild our cultures and businesses from the ground up. Before we dive into how to transform our organizations, let's look at the various ways the eagle and bison show up and manifest at work. So that's what we're going to do in Chapter 4. So Chapter 3, summary. The eagle has divided us against each other along the lines of ideology and race. It's eroding the foundations of our organizations, society, economy, and democracy. The use of violence is supported by a third of us, expected by most of us, and regarded as a problem by almost all of us. Organizations cannot keep developing people and culture in the same ways. They are not working. Organizations must scrap all their plans, dump everything on the table, and rebuild their businesses and cultures mid-flight with an entirely new ethos. Chapter 3, reflection questions. So these are for you and your book buddy or your book club. Where do you see the impacts of racial animosity and political tribalism in your life? How do they impact your organization? Have you ever felt like we'd be better off with those with whom you disagree? And what will you do in the face of our Apollo 13 moment? That's it for Chapter 3, folks. Stay tuned for Chapter 4. We're going to go line by line through how our organizations nurture culture, or as the case I make will reveal, don't nurture culture, actually destroy culture. And if you want to engage deeper, just check the description. There's book clubs, there's ways to discover your purpose, there's you can obviously book me to do speaking and workshops. It's been a pleasure. See you soon.